Hey there, everybody. I am John Allen, the editor of Crux, and this is Last Week in the Church. Happy Friday to you. Today is Friday, April 16th, which means it is the birthday of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Pope Benedict turns 94 today. So from all of us here, a happy Ad Multos Annos at the Pope Emeritus, for the Pope Emeritus, I should say. Listen, we did last week's show actually on Monday, so it's only been 4 days since we've seen each other, but nevertheless, a great deal has happened in those 4 days. So here's what's on the menu today. More Vatican trials. A looming referendum on the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican is nothing if not persistent in its latest arrest warrant. A new Vatican website literally shoots for the stars. And finally, a big-time beatification seems to be in the deep freeze. That's what's on the menu, so please stick around. All right, so I want to remind you that you can find full coverage of all the stories we're going to talk about today on the Crux site. That is cruxnow.com, cruxnow.com, your one-stop shopping destination for the very best in smart, wired, and independent Catholic journalism. When you go on the site, you'll notice we are in the middle of our online fundraising appeal. If you can help us out from the bottom of our collective heart, we would be grateful. We're looking for people willing to make a small monthly contribution. That commitment is important because it gives us stability and it gives us the ability to plan. We're not looking for much, maybe what you would spend on a cheeseburger or streaming a movie this month. Whatever you can do, we would deeply appreciate. Also want to remind you, if you like the program here, please give us a thumbs up. Please give us a like. Please give us a retweet. Go on the social media platform of your choice and make disciples of all the nations. We want to put this show in front of as many eyeballs as possible. Okay, with those naked commercial appeals out of the way, let's get started. We begin this week with more Vatican trials. The Vatican's criminal justice system, which for many years was like the Loch Ness Monster. A lot of people talked about it. Nobody had ever seen it. At least not in action. Now, all of a sudden, it is nearly ubiquitous. It has been handling in recent years a number of high-profile sex abuse cases, and one of those cases continued to sort of clunk forward this week. We also had a glimpse into the more ordinary application of Vatican criminal justice, what amounts to kind of a petty theft case. Let's briefly recap both. We have talked before on this show about the Vatican trial that focuses on a pre-seminary called the Pre-Seminary of St. Pius X on Vatican grounds. A pre-seminary is a facility for young Catholic males, usually, junior high school age, who are considering an eventual vocation to the priesthood. It's an opportunity to give them some discernment, some time for discernment, also a taste of community life, and so on. The claim to fame of this one, the Pre-Seminary of St. Pius X, is that it's actually physically located inside the Vatican, and it provides all the altar boys for papal masses at St. Peter's Basilica. A few years ago, accusations surfaced from one of the former pre-seminarians at this place, a Polish pre-seminarian by the name of Kamil Jarzembowski, who alleged that he had witnessed dozens of acts of sexual misconduct and abuse, and that he'd essentially described a little shop of horrors atmosphere inside the pre-seminary. Did this in a scoop with an Italian journalist by the name of Gianluigi Nuzzi. Nuzzi is famous for being the architect of the VatiLeaks scandals and, in general, for essentially borderline sensationalistic scoops about the Vatican, all right? So this came out. There was an initial review by the diocese up in northern Italy, which technically has responsibility for this place, and they concluded that there was really nothing to the charges, and so it was archived, as they say here in Italy, meaning it was kind of closed. But then there was an appeal directly to Pope Francis. Pope Francis ordered that there should be a new judicial investigation leading to a trial. So the principal accused party in this trial is another former pre-seminarian who went on to be ordained a priest, Father Gabriele Martinelli, who was accused of abusing another pre-seminarian when they were both minors. The other defendant is the former rector, who was accused of covering it up. We have already, in previous hearings, heard from the defendants, we've heard from the accuser, we've heard from other people. This week, we heard from 3 former officials of the pre-seminary who not only said they had never heard anything about abuse or misconduct, but further described Jarzembowski as a kind of loose cannon, an embittered ex-seminarian who was disgruntled with having been tossed out, who is now out for revenge. All right, we will see how this plays out. Future hearings are scheduled. We'll see what verdict the Vatican Court eventually renders. In the meantime, we also got I hate to use the word cute because it's really not cute, but an unusual, anyway, an intriguing glimpse into just ordinary Vatican criminal justice this week with a theft case. Basically, there's a doctor who is connected with the Vatican's health service who does turns in their clinic, has been treating their COVID cases and so on, who was accused last year, October and November, of basically stealing clothing out of a Vatican shop that was meant to be sold. So it isn't quite pickpocketing, but it's petty theft. No apparent motive. The guy is a prominent doctor. He makes over $100K a year. His wife is a doctor who makes a good salary, certainly not a question of need. The defense in the hearing on Thursday suggested that the doctor, they didn't use the word kleptomania, but kind of suggested that these thefts may have been triggered by stress. Vatican prosecutors said, well, but in our code, mental incapacity means you have a stable mental condition, not something that just flares up once in a while. The defense disputed that. This only went on about 15 minutes. The court adjourned until June 23rd, at which point maybe they'll make a decision about whether to commission a psychological investigation. Nothing particularly important about this latter case, except that the fact that it is occurring in full public view with pools of journalists present and all the details divulged immediately after each hearing is, of course, a mammoth step out of the shadows and into the light. It's a step in the direction of transparency. Thing about transparency, rarely is what we're going to learn going to be historic thunderclaps. A lot of it is going to be boring and borderline meaningless, but that's what transparency is all about. We get to see and hear it all. All right, second, a looming referendum on the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican's Congregation for Bishops, led by Canadian Cardinal Mark Willett, held a press conference this week to preview a conference on the theology of the Catholic priesthood that they will be holding next February. Cardinal Willett described it as not simply a debate on priestly celibacy, although inevitably that issue will come up. But he said it's going to be an in-depth theological examination of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council on the priesthood, specifically the relationship the council envisioned between the priesthood of all baptized and the ministerial priesthood, which Cardinal Willett ventured to say has not been fully understood and hence not fully applied in the years since the Second Vatican Council. Now, if you think about it, that's quite a statement because it's been 50 years since the close of the Second Vatican Council. Cardinal's suggestion was that there were a lot of polemics and divisions and disagreements in the years immediately after Vatican II that prevented a fuller, richer appreciation of the Council's teaching and translation of that into pastoral practice. In other words, Cardinal Willett has sketched a very ambitious agenda for this symposium. It is nothing less than a re-examination of what Vatican II actually meant, and not on some relatively tangential point, like, I don't know, how collections should be taken at Sunday Mass, or, what color the walls in papal embassies ought to be painted. I don't mean to suggest those aren't important things, but let's face it, that's not the heart of the action in the Catholic Church. But the nature, understanding, and practice of the priesthood, that cuts right to the quick. So it is going to be fascinating to see what comes out of this symposium next February. No doubt those who want to push the envelope on issues such as celibacy will be gearing up for it. Those who want to hold the line will be gearing up for it. But in this one case, we might want to take a cue from Cardinal Ouellet and say, look, sure, let's focus on the celibacy debate. Let's pay attention to it. It's important. A lot of people have very strong feelings. But it's hardly the whole show. And when we're talking about the legacy of a council being, in a certain sense, codified for all time to come, that's big time stuff. And we will, of course, have full coverage on the Crux site. All right. Third, the Vatican is nothing if not persistent with a new arrest warrant. We talked a couple of weeks ago about a fairly brutal result in a civil court in the UK for the Vatican. Basically, this has to do with the London property scandal. You'll remember this is about a piece of property, a former Harrods warehouse in the posh London neighborhood of Chelsea, that the Vatican Secretary of State initially bought about 50% of for roughly $200 million, and then wanted to buy the rest of for another 180, 190 million. So rounding up, we're talking about 400 million US all in. And this became a scandal because the Secretary of State wanted to finance the purchase with debt from the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank wasn't interested, thought there was something a little hinky about all of this. People have been arrested and fired. Investigations are ongoing. So as part of this investigation, the Vatican has charged that 2 Italian financiers, laymen, one who was involved in the first purchase, one who was involved in the second, basically bilked the Vatican, fleeced it for several million euro. That second financier is a guy by the name of Gianluigi Torzi. The Vatican, through Italian authorities, had requested that authorities in the UK freeze Torzi's accounts and arrest him. They did because that's their treaty obligation. It went in front of a civil judge, and the civil judge said, "Are you kidding me?" Said, "There's a paper trail here. Everything Torzi did was fully authorized by people in the Vatican and the Secretariat of State. There's no case for criminal misconduct here. I'm unfreezing his accounts, and I'd recommend you not go forward." Basically, as bad a result as Vatican prosecutors could have envisioned. Well, what has happened now is that since Torzi has been released, the Vatican went to their counterparts in Italy and asked that Italy issue a request for an arrest warrant of Torzi, again, in the UK. There is a codicil in the bilateral relationship between the Vatican and Italy that allows it to do that. Italy, exercising its treaty obligations, has made the request. Now, that request, because Torzi's lawyer in London has said he'll appeal, presumably it will go before another civil judge in the UK. We will see if the outcome is any different. I will simply say this. The conclusion of that first civil court judge in the UK looking at this mess was the conclusion, frankly, that most people without law degrees or years of experience on the bench would be tempted to reach, which is there are written memos from the 2 highest-ranking officers in the Vatican Secretariat of State, that is, Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin, and the Sostituto, the number 2 guy, Archbishop Edgardo Peña Parra, authorizing in full these transactions and authorizing the payments made to Torzi as a result. Now, you can argue that Torzi was gilding the lily. You can argue who is overbilling, and maybe he was, and maybe there is criminal culpability there, but it's hard to think that if something criminal happened here, that those who signed off on it repeatedly at every stage don't bear at least some measure of responsibility. And the fact that, so far as we know anyway, There has been no investigation launched against either Parolin or Peña Parra. Neither man has been called as a witness in any criminal proceeding by Vatican prosecutors. All that cannot help but induce a certain degree of suspicion that when push comes to shove and the rubber really hits the road, and I could roll out more metaphors, but you get the idea, when things get dicey, the Vatican criminal justice system is designed to find lay culprits, lay bad guys who will carry the weight for what went wrong while insulating the guys in scarlet and purple from any ultimate accountability. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's an outdated perception. Maybe the wheels of change are turning. But I would simply note that at least in this case, we have yet to see much concrete evidence of it. All right, fourth this week. A new Vatican website literally reaches for the stars. Catholics who trade in inside baseball are well aware that the Vatican has its own observatory, its own center of astronomical investigation and research. We know it was actually created in far ago 1891 by Pope Leo XIII. Footnote, also the Pope who launched the modern tradition of Catholic social teaching. Leo XIII was an extraordinary learned man. It is said of him that as a hobby, he would walk around the Vatican gardens composing Latin poetry in Latin hexameter in his mind. You know, just to kill some time. It's what he liked to do. He was very much a man who believed that the church should not be estranged from learning, from science, and the creation of the observatory was a gesture in that regard. The observatory was founded out at Castel Gandolfo. You couldn't really do it at the Vatican because even in the late 19th century, there was too much light and smog in the city. It would have made observing the stars difficult. So they went out to the hills in the Castelli in Castel Gandolfo. Later on, the Vatican Observatory also acquired a facility near Tucson, Arizona, because of course the desert, those are ideal viewing conditions. And so for more than a century, the Vatican Observatory has been on the cutting edge of astronomical research. A great patron of science. There are a number of world-class astronomers on the staff of the observatory. However, that wasn't the whole mandate that Pope Leo XIII gave. Pope Leo XIII said he wanted the world to know that the Vatican had no fear of science, in fact, that it wanted to be a patron of science. It's done a great job. At the second part of that formula, the letting the world know part, maybe not so much. So recently, the head of the Vatican Observatory, an American Jesuit brother by the name of Guy Consolmagno, presided over the launch of a brand new spiffy website, which includes an online digital community for people who were interested in the intersection of faith and science and astronomy. It includes very hip, modern type podcasts. It includes a kind of digital shop, although they're a little bashful, honestly, about calling this a shop. Really what this is for people who want to make a contribution to join the digital community. They get some points they can redeem to get some Vatican Observatory swag. But in any event, it's very cool. And Consolmagno has described this as an effort to sort of not only get the word out in a promotional sense about the Vatican Observatory, but also for the Vatican Observatory to be a catalyst in a broader cultural conversation about faith and science, and the idea that ultimately there is a kind of kismet, a kind of kinship between the two, and viewed properly, they are mutually reinforcing. Check out this new website of the Vatican Observatory. It is fun. It is fascinating. In some ways, it's the church at its best when it comes to the intersection with science. I would add as a footnote that one of the prime movers in this project were our old and great friends at Longbeard Digital Marketing. Longbeard does all the IT for the Crux site. They also design our own digital marketing strategies. Basically, every bright idea about what we've done online has come from Longbeard. And we're not the only ones. They have delivered the same astonishingly innovative services to lots of big, medium, and small fish in the Catholic world. So check them out online too. And if you do have digital marketing needs, I promise you, they have the Midas touch. Whatever they come up with will be gold. All right, finally, this week, speaking of big time, a potentially big-time beatification seems to be in the deep freeze. Several years ago, it was announced that a group had been formed to promote the beatification of the late Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro. Now, if you've spent much time in Italy, you're going to know the story of Aldo Moro like the back of your hand, but of course in other parts of the world, maybe not so much. Aldo Moro was born in 1916, so therefore grew up late 20s, 30s, early 40s in Italy. Extraordinarily faithful Catholic. He was part of something called FUCI, which is a federation of institutions of Catholic universities. Basically, it's where up-and-coming young Catholics would network in the day. During that time, he became known to a young Italian Monsignore by the name of Giambattista Montini, who took a personal interest in Moro. Over the years, the two became friends. Montini went on to become a senior official in the Vatican Secretary of State, then the Archbishop of Milan, and finally, Pope Paul VI, now Saint Paul VI. Moro, meanwhile, went into politics, became a member of the Italian Christian Democrats, became very prominent, twice served as prime minister of the country in the 1960s, 1970s. His great achievement is what was known in Italy as the compromesso storico, the historic compromise between the sort of center-left faction of the Christian Democrats and the Italian communists and socialists. And that brought them into the mainstream. It essentially ended what had been a kind of 30-year question mark about Italy, about whether it was going to remain democratic or enter the communist sphere. And it was considered a great act of statesmanship. He was a kind of center-left, somewhat conservative Catholic. He and Montini and Paul VI saw eye to eye on a variety of things. They spoke on a regular basis. They corresponded regularly. They were very close. In 1978, Moro was kidnapped by the Red Brigades, the left-wing terrorist organization who were behind what's remembered here in Italy as the Anni di Piombo, the years of lead, basically a decade of radical terrorist bombings, kidnappings, executions up and down Italy. Moro was held for 55 days. During that time, Paul VI literally moved heaven and earth to try to save his friend. Paul VI, at one point, issued a public appeal, a handwritten note published by L'Osservatore Romano, begging. He used the word beg. I am begging the Red Brigades to liberate my friend. Behind the scenes, he tried to raise a ransom payment of about $10 million US. At another point, he even offered to take Moro's place as a hostage if Moro would be let go. In the end, Moro's bullet-ridden body was left in the trunk of a car in Rome's political district. Paul VI was anguished. 3 days after that, he went to St. John Lateran and basically, for the first time in the history of the papacy, cursed God in public. Said, I begged you. I wept. I begged you. And you did not hear my prayer to save the life of Aldo Moro, who was my friend. All right, in honor of Moro's memory, therefore, in the fact that throughout his entire life he remained a faithful Catholic, there has been a push in recent years to try to see him beatified. However, his daughter, a few years ago, complained about the slow pace of the process. She eventually got an audience with Pope Francis. She had hopes that would speed things up, but it stalled again. There was then a report in the Italian media that the Congregation for Saints had actually requested bribes, basically, cash payments, to speed things up. That was denied. The congregation said that there is no process underway here. The Vicariato of Roma has not requested a process. The only thing formally that's happened is that a couple of postulators, that is the official in charge of the cause, have been appointed. Both later quit because they said the job was simply overwhelming and they didn't have the resources. Look, I know there are a lot of worthy causes for beatification and sainthood, and I know when you're talking about a politician, it's terribly complex because it's hard to separate the Christian virtue and the political positions. And it's a you know, I mean, I know it's a thicket, and all that said, if ever there was somebody in political life in recent memory who seemed to try to live and, as it happens, die by his Catholic faith, for whom a pope himself wept and remonstrated, channeled Job for a moment with God, this would seem to be a fairly compelling cause. Here's hoping that the authorities in the Vicariato here in Rome, that what remains of the Christian Democrats and all those who remember Aldo Moro's memory will be able to scrape up what it takes to jumpstart this process and give it at least the hearing that it deserves. All right, that is our show for this week. Please give us a thumbs up or a like if you enjoy this content. We are going to see you next Friday, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, have a fantastic and blessed week. Go KC Royals, and we will talk to you again soon.